And I recognize the gentleman from Texas, the ranking member, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank these witnesses as well, and would note that prioritizing debt, such as you pay P&I, principal and interest, is but another way to say default. It really is. It is a means by which we will honor obligations to some and default on obligations to others. And some of the witnesses on the Republican side have indicated that prioritizing and paying some debt is not preferable, that there are consequences. And in fact, one witness, I'll just go through, I've read all of the testimony, but one witness, and I'm going to take a stab at your name, is it DeRoger? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Ms. DeRoger, thank you, has indicated on page 3 of her testimony, in the first full paragraph, to be sure default should not be an option on the table. We'll talk about that later. Also goes on to say, while Washington has difficult choices to make, defaulting on its debt obligations should not be part of the discussion about how to handle the debt limit or reduce long-term government spending. So why are we talking about prioritizing debt? What is this leading up to? Well, I think a better name for this hearing today would be how to mislead voters away from legislation and toward confrontation. Because we are some 400 days plus away from the debt ceiling, some 9,000 plus hours. There's plenty of time to deal with this debt ceiling without creating a crisis. There is no pending crisis now, no impending crisis. And because there is no impending crisis, we have somehow concluded that we need to now strategize on how we can prioritize the debt such that we can later on create a crisis. This crisis that we're creating gets in the way of legislation. The same witness, who is from George Mason University, has given the majority an outline of what can be done to deal with the so-called debt ceiling, and has indicated that there are several things that can be done, and we should be pursuing the outline of what can be done. This is what some of your witnesses have indicated, that there are things that we can do to eliminate the possibility of having a debt ceiling that creates a confrontation. So we should be engaged in legislation right now. We should be legislating Mr. McClintock's bill. And finally this. The majority has the control of both the House and the Senate. The House and the Senate. You indicated that if you could get control, you would do all of these things to deal with the debt ceiling. Yet rather than deal with the legislative side of it, we're here today plotting a means by which we can have a partial default and trying to convince the public that a partial default will in some way not be the equivalent of a default that would cause us to lose credit ratings, won't cause investors to conclude that treasuries are not the best investment for them. Just pay the principal and interest. And by the way, when you just pay the principal and interest, you will not be paying payments to small businesses and contractors and vendors, Medicare payments to doctors, Medicaid payments to doctors and health providers. We won't be paying for the school lunch programs. We won't be paying for the NIH grants that we have outstanding. We won't be paying the salaries and benefits to federal employees. We won't be paying for tax refunds. By making a partial payment, we then eliminate all of these other things that we are obligated to pay. So I don't think that this hearing is seriously about anything other than finding a clever way to default at some point in the future when the debt ceiling may become an issue, because right now it has been suspended. And I take the debt ceiling seriously. I take debt seriously. I think we ought to cut, and I think we ought to increase revenue so as to avoid having to have a debt crisis. That will be something that we can manage, but for some reason today, we're going to look the other way and misdirect. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.